So, what questions or concerns do we have? And it doesn't have to be about the roadmap or technology. Oh, thank you. Feel free to also ask questions about the DRSA, about NIST, security, network expansion, anything that's keeping you up at night.
Is NIST keeping anyone up at night?
I think John Downing has a question.
Semi-technical question is the intent for, if I'm querying the hub in order to query someone else, do I write my query as if I'm writing to the actual endpoint I'm trying to query to, and you pass it through wholesale? Or do I query you and then you query them as two separate transactions?
So there's actually a couple of anticipated kind of sub-use cases to that. The first would be for an organization that wants to use the hub as if it essentially didn't exist. It just provides the value of having one single connection instead of hundreds of connections to the participants. So in that use case, there's no coding changes needed to the initiating system or responding systems, and there's one connection to maintain. But also that means that there's essentially no change to the message. So how we envision that being rolled out is that the UDI or its FHIR equivalent would actually have a copy that's aware of the hub and who's connected to it. And so what would happen is the UDI, or the directory, would look almost the way it looks today for organizations that do not want to modify their systems to accommodate the hub, except that instead of pointing to 2, 3, 500 different connections, it points to one connection, the hub. But the participant name would be the same, the home community ID would be the same. So essentially all the technical details will remain the same as they are today. It's just that the actual endpoint would go to the hub. So that's the first use case. And again, that's for organizations that have a legacy system where they don't want to change their code, at least not today. The second kind of a sub-use case is where an organization wants to take advantage of more advanced capabilities. We mentioned the roadmap. RLS is on consideration. It's actually already there for care quality, as you're probably aware. We have MPI on our roadmap under consideration. The ability to control targeted versus broadcast versus arbitrary groups of recipients that respond to a request. Well, those would actually require some enhancements to the initiator. So in that use case, you'd actually would have more awareness of the hub, and you'd actually would modify the message going to the hub to say, for example, I want to query all pediatric oncology centers throughout the United States, or pick an arbitrary group like that. That's the idea, is that basically you would have a modified message with perhaps something different on the URL with additional commands to the hub, giving you the control over broadcast versus targeted versus grouping or things like that. Does that answer your question, John?
Yes, I have one leading question follow-on though.
I'll give that to Jay then.
Let's say that there's a syntax error in my XCPD. Does that get forwarded on to the downstream participant in the first case but not the second? Or both cases, or neither?
So one of the methodologies that we have in mind as we actually roll out the hub is we would work with each of you to, as an initiator mostly, to respond, to understand what you want the hub to do. If you want basically to be just one connection that works just like things work today, is just going through one technical connection, then probably a spec would just say, here's a new URL, go for it. But realistically, I expect that specification would include information such as service levels, perhaps throttling of connections. Like let's say we know your system can only handle 10 inbound queries per second. Well, maybe the hub could throttle that for you to buffer that so you don't have to buy new hardware. And then another area I expect that spec would handle is clarifications around things like maybe your vendor, or I believe you actually are a vendor, but perhaps your technology under the hood requires flavor A of XCPD, whereas your partner or a partner requires flavor B. And that does happen in the real world frequently. What could happen is the hub could actually mediate that difference as per this mutually agreed upon transparent spec. So essentially the hub is in the middle and takes care of those compatibility issues. But a true syntax error, that would be rejected and kickback.
Jay,
Dan.
do you have an idea when the new DRSA, well, first of all, thank you for sharing. That was really good information. But do you have an idea when the new DRSA is going to be out? And that's the first question. The second question is, can you share who the vendor is? And then the third question is the hub going to be simply a pass-through of information? And it sounds like you're kind of setting up to potentially be a QHIN. So So at that point, does that pass-through now become a data repository as well?
Jen, could you explain the DRSA process, and then I'll tackle the subsequent topics?
Sure. So the final language that we're working on is really to incorporate the federal partners' requirements related to the NIST 800-171, and that's controlled unclassified information. We have a small task group that is currently working on draft language for that. We have a draft that we'll be providing to that group, and they should be meeting in the next 2 weeks. So the goal is there might be some more tweaks to that, and we still have to go through the formal amendment process. So we're expecting it late November, early December, likely, but it is still pushing forward.
Dan, I apologize, I've forgotten about half of your questions. I think the first one was who's the vendor? No, we're not able to say who it is yet. Number two, is the hub intended to be a pass-through? And the answer to that is absolutely. Number three, are we looking towards are we preparing for the QHIN? And I would say we're absolutely preparing for it, but we're absolutely not committed until we receive more information. And of course, this is all up to the coordinating committee. These are not my decisions, but I'm giving you a read into my kind of fuzzy crystal ball. And then finally, about the clinical, the central data repository, would we start to store a longitudinal patient record? And boy, my gut reaction is not only no, but no. But I also have to say never, and maybe I'm being short-sighted with that initial reaction. But yeah, I'm really curious to see what the TEF says when it comes out, and if there is the requirement for that. In my little pea brain, though, I just don't think the U.S. is ready for Big Brother at a national level to have a nationwide central clinical data repository for each patient. I think I believe that the American public trusts the states to do that, and the regional HIEs who offer services we cannot. But again, never say never.
And, it's just the technology speaking, so it's Jay and Jen's choice on this, but, throwing out an alternative, it doesn't have to be either or as far as clinical data repositories and data storage. For example, Delaware, which is the first state that went live on a statewide HIE, they address this issue by having a cache. So basically the data from the 6 hospitals was commingled for basically around a 6-week period, configurable period of time. So that's maybe another alternative as well too, is to have a data cache for performance and stability and reliability reasons without it being persistent durably.
What other questions, concerns, comments? Oh.
Hello. Until the hub comes, it's going to be point-to-point connection between the vendor and us. And we get the response very fast. Once the hub comes, it's going to be like 170 plus vendors sending all the requests. So what about the network traffic? How do we handle it? Will it be synchronous? Will we have to wait for the response?
Yeah, great question. So the hub is going to have an optional broadcast feature. But we really intend that to be for use that organizations really need it. And in terms of patient care, yeah, I do believe that it's best to broadcast those messages out. But I also recognize that the network traffic is really going to overwhelm the participants. So our intention, and again, this is something that our coordinating committee has to think long and hard about, and actually a number of organizations have volunteered to set up a little task force to talk about it. So as I remember it, Teresa and then Kaiser and I think maybe even Matt Eisenberg, if I remember correctly, wanted to talk about it. But I believe that we will offer a broadcast service for emergency purposes. So if there's an emergency situation and you really don't know where a patient is, then you can send out these messages. I also believe that with the RLS or the RLE, if you're able to see where a patient has been, I don't believe there's any need to send a broadcast message out to 250 participants. And then I recognize that the VHA relies on this process. So that's just something that we have to reconcile. And they're doing it today for all their patients. I know I believe I've heard it's uncomfortable on or about Go Live Day when they kind of run a patient backload and there's a lot of volume. But at the same time, I'm told that after that, the VHA traffic isn't tremendous.
The other part that answers the question too, so I expect part of this rollout will include a capacity planning exercise that we all participate in. And so this should be transparent to you well ahead of time, where organizations can share their anticipated volumes and types of data exchange as well too, so no one's caught by surprise.
And how do we handle it?
Are we headed toward service level agreements or service level objectives with timing, not just with the hub, but with our endpoints for satisfying responses?
I think that's a wise course of action myself. In our exploratory discussions we've had with our various partners, that's something we expect to do. I think we don't have a contractual obligation with the partner or initiator yet to do that, but I don't see how we can move forward without that. And we're also building that into our discussions with our prospective or expected vendor as well too. So if they would actually have a service level obligation, we then provide the same or something more lax kind of by definition to you as an initiator as well too. So short answer, yes.
But that's for the hub. What about the data holders and supply?
Same thing, same answer, because the hub would be a function of the return performance of those connected to it. And it's actually one of the benefits of the hub as well too, because right now, I'm not sure what you all do, but a lot of participants I've seen, they take that burden on themselves, and so they're out there pinging their key partners. They're trying to reverse engineer whether their partner's up and running, or available, or down, or slow. That's actually one of the functions we're building into the contract with our vendor, so that they will take that burden on for you, so you don't have to necessarily do that anymore. So basically, we'll actually have awareness in near real time. I mentioned earlier today about the test patient library in the directory. Those kind of dovetail together. So one benefit of having test patients within the directory is we can then use that to measure latency, availability, reachability, and performance of participants, and then reach out to them dynamically if there's a problem. And one of the other things we've envisioned too, and we can, I think, share a prototype of dashboard with you, is actually exposing to authorized participants of the hub to basically a real-time dashboard which shows you are your exchange partners up and running nominally? Are they slow? Are they down for scheduled maintenance? Or are they down for unscheduled maintenance as well too? So I think this really kind of unifies a lot of things we've talked about over time to improve it for all of us.
I think Vanessa had a question.
Eric, I just want to confirm, you guys are planning on doing SLAs with each participant that joins the hub. So there'll be one, for example, with the VA and the eHealth exchange for the expectations service level agreement for the hub communications.
That's my expectation, yes. And then what we're going to have to do, as Marty alluded to, there will be an SLA for the hub proper, from the point a message is received until it's dispositioned within the hub technology. But more broadly speaking, what I really would like to see us do as well as part of that process is have an SLA that extends out to the participants. Now again, that's just me speaking as a technologist. The coordinating committee will ultimately make that decision. But what I'm going to advocate for, assuming Jay and Jen are all in agreement with this, is that we also take that same capability and say, we as a coordinating committee agree that for treatment purposes or disaster response purposes where a human is initiating the request, it should be a 3-second response time for 90% of cases. Or perhaps if it's an automated system that's doing batches overnight, maybe a 5-minute response time is entirely appropriate for that kind of a sub-use case. Does that answer your question?
It does. And then the second question was about what you brought up earlier about the test patients. Are you going to be able to load a variety of them? Because with the VA, we have to use ones that are already within our system.
We're planning on using your test patients, so I hope you're good with that. So actually, I'm only kind of halfway joking there because, really the federal partners, having driven a lot of this, your test patients are already loaded. A lot of the system's already out there. Cheddar is pretty famous now. And so, what we're planning on doing is, collaborating with you, obviously getting your permission, and seeing if we can leverage the DoD, the VHA, and other, largely deployed test patients, populate those into the directory so we can actually already leverage that work that you've kind of laid the groundwork for. And then when that's not practical, or if it's not possible, we don't have your permission, then we'll, just work with each individual organization to get their test patient census and then deploy that. And by the way, one part of this too I have in mind is not only for positive tests, but also negative. I'd like to see some test patients in there that are not going to match. Maybe they've opted out, or perhaps there's twins, so there's a known ambiguous match in certain cases. So I think we should include both negative as well as positive testing in that process. But does that answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
Can we have your patients?
Yeah.
Your test
We'll
patients?
get Dr. Donahue to approve that.
All right.
Yeah, so Vanessa, just to clarify what Eric said, or just to reiterate what he said, that would definitely, the topic of SLAs, what's the required response time for a participant? That's something the coordinating committee would have to think very thoughtfully about. Marty?
I'll go back to SLAs again, because we've talked about this in the message layer to say, I would put a time to live in the query to say, not set SLAs and everybody's going to say, I'm got to be the fastest, is, put it in your time to live, and this is what I expect the response to be. But I think that's some of the
Right.
technical work we have to do. It's hub related, but it's also just the tech spec work that we do in Spec
Right.
Factory.
So you're basically saying put the initiator in control of that.
Yeah. Let
Okay.
initiators do that, and then, time to live, on the responder side, so that they can prioritize their workload.
All right, thank you.
Oh, we'll see where the microphone goes. Goes to Teresa, ladies first.
I just want to add to that. One of the considerations you have to have is some of us are central as well as federated query. And so we're subject to how quick the data source is responding to us. And so we can think about that technically. We could respond in two sequences, initially what we have and, a second one. But that's more for the coordinating committee to think through.
And we actually have, more knowledge now than we did 10 years ago when we designed this too. There's actually a new standard out that was mentioned previously called async that actually, it's a European-based standard, but it's a very close spec to XCPD and XCA. And what it lets us do is basically say, give me the data and then get back to me when you got it. And then after some delay period of time, the data is actually pushed back to the requester. So one possible approach is maybe the next generation of the hub could actually include this additional async capability, so we can actually, say, give me the data, and then when your responder is able to do it, they push that back to you.
Yeah, one extra little tidbit is if the coordinating committee did decide that that's a new expectation they want to set, they're probably going to want to set one SLA or one time for each message. So one for patient discovery, one for query retrieve, and one for document retrieve.
Yeah, and there's actually potentially even a chance to optimize that by taking into account the idea of a sub-use case, such as, batch versus real-time request. Like if the physician is sitting in an ED about to perform a procedure and they want to make sure it's not going to be adverse, then that, the expectation would be, near immediate response time. Whereas if it's a batch process where scheduled patients being seen tomorrow, it may be entirely acceptable for that to, take minutes for a response to come back. So maybe we have a chance there to optimize that.
So we at eHealth are pretty selfish, or at least I am.
It's all about you today, huh?
Exactly,
Okay.
right. So I saw on your roadmap, or on the hub diagram that you gave Jen,
Yeah.
that you had quite a few vendors listed, and you had Commonwealth on there, but we're Cerner. So are they part of that process, or is that going to be a phase two?
Yeah, so the part of the DRSA amendment mentioned earlier includes connectivity to care quality. And I want to word this correctly, but care quality has an agreement with Commonwealth that allows Commonwealth members to become care quality implementers as well too. And so essentially the answer is that would be included as part of this, yes, is my expectation. I don't know if you, Jen,
I just want to correct, so for Commonwealth, customers of Commonwealth to be care quality connections underneath Commonwealth as an implementer, just to clarify.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so to clarify that further then, do we need to go through Commonwealth? Because that didn't work for us.
No,
We didn't like it.
no, you would not. So you would be
Okay.
you have the option to come through the eHealth Exchange as your
Good,
implementer.
all right, cool.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, this is complicated. I mean, it can really make your head hurt.
Make it
But the idea here is that, and I didn't put down all of the carry quality implementers. There are actually a few more. But the idea here is that someone like Atrium, if they chose to, could implement, could reach out through carry quality to Commonwealth, to Epic Care Everywhere, to AthenaNet, to NextGen, to SureScripts, et cetera. But since you're a Cerner shop, you also have the alternative of saying, I don't want the eHealth Exchange to get me to carry quality. I want to do it through Commonwealth. Yeah.
Chart that makes it simpler? That you could- Is there-
This,
Is there a chart like the pros and cons of hitting via the Commonwealth platform or via hitting the eHealth Exchange? What's the advantage of one over the other?
no, that's probably my next project is to make another diagram. But yeah, good idea. Jared.
Yeah. So a lot of these diagrams from Jay, I've seen these for the last 5 years. They'll all look kind of similar, and there'll be a road on at least 3 of the slides. And it's the same road with that slight curve at the middle of the slide. So moving away from SLAs and things that kind of terrify me, and you might have to wear your DD hat to answer the question here, but as we move into things where there are different artifacts that aren't the data that we normally talk about, and they aren't just images, it is algorithms, predictive analytics, it is new ways to think about patients and their data, and things like providers that are saying, I'm going to determine whether or not Jay shops at Target and what that means for his likelihood to refill his prescriptions this month. And there's all this other stuff now that the healthcare space is creating. Is there anything in the roadmap for how we think about and how we communicate that stuff?
Yeah, so I believe you're talking about social, or using my terminology, social determinants. And no, embarrassingly, I have not given that a tremendous amount of thought. Marianne Yeager, who stepped out for a moment, is who I look to for that topic. Jen, do you have any words of wisdom on that?
I do not, but I do know that that's one of the areas that Marian's been exploring from Sequoia.
So we actually did talk to several social determinant-focused organizations. The challenge there seems to be they're not online. There's no standards. They're in the paper world, filing cabinets that it takes months to, for example, the workflow I'd love to see us deploy is when someone's discharged. At that point, the care coordinator is notified in real time if that person's had, say, housing stability, or similar issues. The problem is we're almost starting from scratch, working with that domain. And I think Kevin has a comment as well. So.
Yeah,
Thanks.
just a hidden little part of Meaningful Use Stage 3 in the certification requirements, actually not in the use requirements, but in the certification requirements, there are 10 social and behavioral factors that are standards-based, that are tested as part of the 2015 certification edition standards currently. They're based on an IOM report that was commissioned by the VA. So they're kind of consensus-based. There's also, through one of the models at CMMI, a set of social determinants of health information that is being exchanged currently as part of that model, and it's being done electronically. It's shared through also fully deployed at many federally qualified community health centers. So there are some data standards that are active, tested, certified with specs that are being shared. They're definitely not the be-all and end-all. There's a lot of hue and cry from the industry to have more than that, but those do exist. As to distributed kind of query specs, that's what we do with quality measures. So the ECQMs actually have a HL7 query specification standard, and called the HQMF, Health Quality Measure Format, and that defines how to put your data into a query format that then can be used and tested and exchanged. So happy to go into details there, but that is an HL7 balloted standard that is currently deployed in the CMS programs.
Well, thank you, Dr. Larson. That's very valuable information. So I'd like to follow up with you on that.
All right, so Mike, did you have a last minute question?
Yeah, just a comment, I guess. One concern I have is like when you connect to the hub, you may not necessarily, you have a connection with someone else on the hub, but you may not necessarily have like a good connection, I would say, right? It could be like patient matching may be lacking in that connection. You may be getting registry errors back on that connection. So I could see a need for some good reporting and that kind of thing on this, and just, if you know that with the record locator service, if you know that patient exists somewhere and you're getting a patient knockdown response, maybe there could be a report on it. I can see the need to really know, because we won't have that testing anymore like we do with eHealth Exchange, where you do non-production testing.
Well, thanks. That's a great question. So one of the capabilities we've built into our contract includes the ability for an initiator to get to that detailed diagnostic information you're talking about. So this would include filtered access to the raw logs, just filtered appropriately, including for TLS debugging issues, which I expect the hub staff would take care of that, but just in case you need to or want to see that. Also application level logs and performance level information as well too. So that's actually part of the current draft contract.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Yeah, so again, my name is Jay Nakashima. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions or concerns, or I'll be